The First Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees the right to free speech. It is the number one issue that was facing our Congress, our representatives, and the people who, the founding fathers who created this country, because they had not had freedom of speech before that. It would have been a big issue. There's freedom of religion was all in there. It's all kind of worked in together because they were not free to say what they wanted, but within pressure from the government, from Britain. That's one of the reasons why we actually rebelled against Britain, was because we wanted to have freedom of speech. We wanted to differentiate ourselves from countries all over the world where there is no free speech, to where if you say the wrong things, you could go to jail. You could be supported. You could lose your job. All kinds of bad things can happen. America was always the place where you could come to get that free speech. That's starting to go away now these days, and it's getting worse and worse, and we should all be troubled by this. Now, we're going to have later this afternoon, Tulsi Gabbard's going to be on our show, and she's going to be talking about one of the reasons why she left the Democratic Party, and part of that was because they were trying to suppress free speech, even among their own adherents. But I want to show you something that she said earlier this year at the CPAC in February, I believe it was, on specifically the issue of free speech, because in my view, she absolutely lays out the standard for what it ought to be.
Freedom isn't free. We can't lose sight of what we can accomplish when we, the people, stand together on the foundational principles that this country was built on. A free people with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must protect free speech of all Americans. We must stand against those who'd rather censor, cancel, and smear rather than engage in honest debate as our founding fathers did. When the free speech of one person is threatened, even when that speech is reprehensible to us, the free speech of all people is threatened.
I could not more strongly agree on that part. Even if you don't like at all what somebody's saying, as long as it doesn't break the law, as long as it doesn't violate any other provisions of the Constitution or elsewhere, it has to be allowed. Because if you don't, if you start picking and choosing which speech is okay and which speech is not, then it's not free by definition. And we're starting to get into that territory right now. One of the biggest places this is starting to show up is in the Israeli-Hamas war and the whole Palestinian issue, because it has really animated a lot of people in this country, as we're going to see here shortly. Now, this past weekend, Senator Mitt Romney and Secretary of State Blinken sat down to have a conversation in a conference that was held. And this issue comes up because there's an issue before the Congress right now to where they are about to ban TikTok because they don't like some of the things it's doing. Now, a lot of people will say one thing. They'll actually claim it's for national security reasons or whatever. But as Senator Romney admits here, it's not all that. Now, to set up what you're about to see, Romney is actually doing the interviewing here, and he's going to ask the Secretary of State his impression about why people don't get it. But it's funny because, in a weird sort of way, because Romney is acting like it's just a PR issue. There's just something wrong with the Israelis. They're not doing a good enough PR issue, because if people just knew the truths from his perspective, everything would be fine and nobody would be for the Palestinians. It is hard to imagine how badly he could be off and seeing what's actually going on and what's actually animating people to exercise their First Amendment rights and to free speech, to say things that some don't like. But follow along with what's being said here, and especially note what he says about TikTok at the end. We'll come back in just a second.
Typically, the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? How have they and we been so ineffective at communicating the realities there and our point of view?
Well, look, I think there are two things. One is that, look, there is an inescapable reality, and that is the inescapable reality of people who have and continue to suffer grievously in Gaza, and that's real, and we have to be focused on that and attend to that. And of course, the way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative, and you have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact of images dominates, and we can't discount that. But I think it also has a very, very, very challenging effect on the narrative.
Yeah, a small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcasts. So I'd note that's of real interest, and the president will get the chance to make action in that regard.
So you heard there at the end there, Romney's basically saying that the kids on TikTok, the younger generation especially, is overwhelmingly against what's happening to the Palestinian people, and they are making their voices heard both on TikTok and in speeches and in protest around the country, some of which are going on right now. I was actually watching the news just before we came on, and there's some things happening at San Diego and scores of other universities around the country right now. What's going on? And he's saying that one of the solutions is, well, let's get rid of TikTok because that's where all these kids are. Now, why do you suppose that they're choosing TikTok as opposed to nearly anything else that's going on there? And now they want to claim that it's about China and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of the arguments that are raised, it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And I don't think that that's really what's motivating it. I think they don't like the message that's going on, so they want to ban it. You heard Romney say President Biden will have his chance to do that pretty quick. It's to silence that free speech. But it's not going to work. I mean, just because you get rid of one platform, I mean, they're going to find another one because it's the issues that's involved, what's going on. Now, that's what's happening with the U.S. here, but it's unfortunately not limited to that. This is going on all over the place. There is a movement really of all over the world right now that's having people who have it under their control. They want to get rid of free speech. Anything that goes against their preferred narrative, they want to shut it down and accuse it of all kinds of things. We see this, for example, in the early part of the Russia-Ukraine war. We saw that actually just before the war started, the German government didn't like what the Russian side was saying, because now understand that the view of the West is that Russia's war is completely unprovoked. It was premeditated, as Biden has said, and it was no reason for it whatsoever. Russia has a little bit different view. They'll say, no, it has a lot to do with what you guys have done since 2008. You've been advancing NATO to our border. We've been telling you not to do it. You say you're going to do it anyway. Our security is directly threatened by a military alliance on our border. We don't listen to any of that. So Russia's saying those kind of things. Well, the West doesn't want to hear it. So Germany took the lead. I believe it was on the 3rd of February, 2022, and shut down Russia's English language news that was broadcasting in their country called RT. Here's how that went.
Amid heightened tensions over Ukraine, relations between Berlin and Moscow have taken another hit. And it all concerns the Russian state broadcaster known as RT, or Russia Today. On Wednesday, a German media regulator announced that it had banned RT from airing its German language channel in the country. The authorities said that the channel did not have the necessary license under European law.
I mean, at least be honest about it. Don't suddenly discover right on the eve of war that the side that you don't like is saying messages they don't like, and then discover, oh, well, actually, they didn't have a license, so they shut it down. That was completely bogus, obviously. And Russia did the same thing. So they tit for tat kind of thing. On the very next day, this happens.
Deutsche Welle's Moscow office has to close by order of the Russian government. The decision came after Germany's media regulators banned German language programming of Russia's state media broadcaster RT for operating without a German broadcasting license. DW's Director General, Peter Limburg, called the Russian government's decision a disappointment and a total overreaction.
Yeah, a total overreaction. We want to be able to ban your stuff so nobody gets your point of view, and we want you to keep our line open so we can keep on giving our propaganda on your side so that our view gets out there and yours doesn't. What could be more natural? How unreasonable for Russia not to play along with that. You see how absurd these things are. And of course, this is not to defend Russia. They've also shut down all kinds of other opposition media themselves. I mean, they're terribly egregiously violating this issue and shutting down free speech left and right. Anybody that doesn't say things that the Kremlin likes, or at least that they can't control. But then, see, we also say those darn evil Russians, they're terrible at this kind of stuff because Putin's done all that stuff. But of course, we're fighting for democracy. I've heard that until I'm just almost nauseous from this whole thing. The Ukraine side is the standard bearers of democracy. And in fact, they're fighting for all of democracy, as Senator Schumer has said. This is an existential fight between democracy and autocracy, so they say. But then you have on the Ukraine side that the government is also shutting down many things, as Tulsi Gabbard also pointed out here in an earlier post.
In Ukraine, President Zelensky has already taken complete control of the media. He has outlawed his political opposition parties, and he has banned the second largest Orthodox Christian church.
So it goes far beyond. They are literally shutting down all dissent of anything they don't want, whether it's the media, political parties, or even religious entities that they don't like. So there are no good guys here, folks. This is just something that's going on, and it's freedom of speech is getting suppressed all across the board. And it's just, that's just how the things are flowing right now. And it's not good for anybody, because one of the reasons this channel exists and is that we want the truth to get out there. And sometimes I give people the mic here that you might not like, some that aren't on your side, and vice versa. When some of the other people who are on your side, when we have other guests, they don't like it. But what we're after is not just an echo chamber that whatever you already believe, we're going to reinforce it. But we want people to think. We want people to see there's more than one view on things. We want different people to talk so that we have freedom of speech, so that you have the benefit to hear different points of view. Then you can come to whatever view you want to do. No one's going to tell you how to think. You get the opportunity on this channel, and why we will continue to exist, why we say we're unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the ground truth. Then you get to make your choice, even if it's different than I would come to. Even if you have a different conclusion, we're going to put this stuff out there. Like when we put the debate that John Mearsheimer and I had last month in New York in front of the Council on Foreign Relations. We put the whole debate up there so that you can see what the other side says as well, even if you disagree with it. We put that out there. That is so important. But when we try to start banning things, it just never works out. And look, there's when we get back again to this issue I started off with, talking about these protests that are going on right now at college campuses and other places all around the country. A few weeks back, Senator Tom Cotton was asked to talk about on television about a protest that was going on at that point on the Golden Gate Bridge. And he went on there to say, well, some things that I find a little bit reprehensible, and see if you see anything in here about free speech.
I agree with you that you have to get to these criminals early. If something like this happened in Arkansas on a bridge there, let's just say I think there'd be a lot of very wet criminals that have been tossed overboard, not by law enforcement, but by the people whose road they're blocking. If they glued their hands to a car or the pavement, well, probably pretty painful to have their skin ripped off. But I think that's the way we'd handle it in Arkansas. And I would encourage most people anywhere that get stuck behind criminals like this who are trying to block traffic to take matters in their own hands. There's only usually a few of them, and there's a lot of people being inconvenienced. It's time to put an end to this nonsense.
You know, just exactly what Tom Cotton thinks free speech is. I mean, you saw the images on the screen there while he was talking are people just on a bridge with the thing that says, I think, free Palestinians, so that they're not being killed. That was all it was out. There wasn't violence. They weren't doing anything to anybody. They were being an inconvenience for sure. But that's what free speech is all about, is to bring notice to an issue that you find that's important to you. And look, they were cleared off the bridge. If they were civil disobedience, which of course Martin Luther King was all about that. That's what he used to do it. Also, he used his free speech, and those things were worked out the way without violence here. But you see that To the contrary, in contrast to that people who were doing civil disobedience, you had a U.S. senator, an active U.S. senator advocating violence against people exercising their First Amendment rights. That's just incomprehensible to me how that didn't get a huge backlash. That he's actually saying that they should throw them off the bridge, that they should rip the skin off their hand if they glue themselves to something, and because they're supported. And not a fraction, 0% even consideration for all of these Palestinian people who are being killed because of the Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. No sympathy whatsoever. It's like they don't even exist. He could care less. And that is the nature of some of our politicians today. But you see, like I say, this is going on all over the place. Anytime we get to move in a direction where our free speech is being curtailed to where you don't have the right to say something today, it's bad for you too. Even if you're on the side of some of these people that Cotton or some of these others that if you don't want these protests going on, for example, you think that the students are wrong. You should not want them to have their speech shut off, because I'm telling you, folks, later on, it could be something that you think that's important, something that you find out problematic, that you want to protest, that you want to have your free speech, whether it's on social media, whether it's commenting on shows like this. If that starts getting shut down and cut off, now all of a sudden it's your issue that gets silenced. And the things that are important to you that don't give a voice, or taken far enough, it could be you that loses your job. We can't have that, folks. If we're going to have a great country, if we're going to have a country that really is standing on the rule of law, we have to have free speech. We have to defend it, even if it's something we don't like. That's just the truth of it. And I just wanted to highlight this because I know it's portioned both in the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israeli-Hamas war. It's kind of an undertext to it, and nobody wants to give the other side a voice, but we have to give every side a voice so that all the truth gets out there, and then we can make up our decisions. Because if you're a pro-Israeli person, for example, and all you ever hear about is October 7th and all these things that the Hamas terrorists did to the Israeli people, if that's all you ever hear, then of course you do believe that everybody over there deserves punishment. You don't even think about the civilians getting killed. But if you find out that in justly going after terrorists, thousands upon thousands of innocent men, women, children, elderly are being killed, hundreds of thousands are in danger of starving to death, that can change your mind. That can change your viewpoint. But if that dissent gets cut off, and if no one even hears that side of the story, then those people could continue to die in large numbers. People that you may otherwise actually care about just as a normal human being. That's the actual cost of shutting down free speech, and why I'm so adamantly in defense of it, regardless of anybody's opinion on whatever the matter is. Everybody's voice needs to be heard so that we can prevent some of these things. Thank you very much. And listen, we ask you to come back here in about a half an hour. We're going to have Doug McGregor on. He's going to be talking about what's going on in the Russian war, because look, there's some things happening here. There's been some events even over the weekend you may not be aware of that could really impact where this war's going. Doug's going to tell us all about that at 1 o'clock p.m. today. And we'll see you back here on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.